Welcome to Lesson 17, Creating a New Business Service. So far we have seen how you can use an existing business service within code. Now we're going to actually create a new one, something which can only be done in Java, and we're going to create a service that will count to-dos. And this service will then be able to be placed into our plugin which was creating a to-do, and previous to creating it, it tested to see how many to-dos there were and making sure that there aren't any which are already in a non-complete state. So we will be able to use this new business service at the end in that plugin as well. So let's first turn to the actual application, and this is the business service eventually that we will create. Count to-do entries, and you can have a look at the schema. And schema has inputs and outputs. Key value is the ID of the primary key that should be which is which is in the to-do. The entry status, what status count of a particular status of the to-do entry and of the to-do type. And the output is how many to-dos there are. So as you will see, we have, similar to how we created a new maintenance object, there's a service name over here, and this service name will correspond to the Java annotation that we create. So if I go now to Eclipse, I'm going to open up that service program. And this is the service program. And you'll see in the annotation for a new business service, we have page maintenance. For the maintenance object, it's called entity page maintenance, and for a business service, it's just called page maintenance. Entity in the sense that there is persistence of those data fields, as opposed to in a business service, they are not actually coming from the actual database. There actually isn't a wizard to create the annotation here, and you have to create it yourself. It's pretty simple. The data elements for the inputs and all of them, you don't distinguish between the inputs and the outputs. These just simply have the data fields, and they have to be real fields in the database. And the service name here corresponds to the service name in the app. So if I've already created this code. Once I generated it, if you actually look in the generated folder, you will see that we have under services a service called CM to do count, and that is the service that is created, and it's very similar, as you see, to the annotation itself. So let us look at what I want to show you here is really the structure of a business service and how we normally create one. First of all, it's named normally service. We extend it with a generated class, which is standard, and we match the action here change to the name of the method. And it takes in the method change, takes in the data elements. And the way you actually access those data elements is by using item get structure, as you see over here. And if you see, what we actually are doing are first of all reading in the data from the key value, the status, and the to-do type. Now, the way we the particular pattern that we normally use for a business service is to use two supporting other classes. We have a class for the data. So if I look over here, we're going to be instantiating a data class, and it's this class over here, and this simply has getters, setters, and getters for the four particular pieces of data that we are reading in and out of our business service. So this is a annotation with a business component, which is any piece of supporting data that you can use within your modules, within your Java classes. You can use a separate class and use it, and this is used for the data, and this is again the standard pattern that we use, and we have getters and setters to set in and out the data. And then we have the another class which does the calling of the actual code to retrieve the to-do count. So what it actually does, it reads in the data and then calls the private retrieve to-do count. And the private retrieve to-do count is nearly identical to the code that we had when we were doing the plugin, where we created the entity query, and it's basically taking the data and taking it from the data class, input output data, and then finally at the end outputting the count of how many to-dos there are to the data. Slightly different in the sense that in this particular example, I did a count as opposed to before we did I think we just simply did we retrieved the record sets, and if the record set was greater than 0, we returned a boolean, something like that. So it's slightly different, but the concept is nearly identical. So what we have is, going back to the main service, we have the following. We're reading in the data. Again, we see the data being read in by calling the item get structure, instantiating the data class and reading in the data using the setters, instantiating the other to do the count class, which we're going to use. We're using some factory methods. You see that we have a factory new instance for these business components that we can use. And then I'm calling business component retrieve to do count using the data which we've already set. And as we saw, the retrieve to do count will do the query and update the data, and we pass back the data, so we are able to then take the updated data, which is going to be the count, and we're going to set it on the to-do count. And then we have a standard framework method we have to call set override results for change, which you standard have to do for a business service like this. So that is the concept of how to work with create a new business service. Again, once you've run the artifact generator, you are going to create the service, and the service we saw before, and this service links to the service that we have here. Again, you need to create in your schema for your business service the corresponding inputs and outputs for your so that you can actually access the data from the business service from the app. And then you can actually use this business service in multiple ways. You can actually use this business service used in config tools within a script. Also, you can use it in code, as we saw in the earlier lessons. So, if I actually go back to my code, you will see that I have an updated create to do and log, which we saw previously. And if you remember that this code is first of all checking to see if a to-do exists. And here we're going to now, instead of using the old code, if you remember that the old code simply, if we just compare it, let's actually do that. I'm going to take the original code. This was the original code that we used, and what it did was if existing to do, and the existing to do over here queried the data directly without which is only obviously, it's a private method only available for this particular class, no one else. Now we have created a service so that instead I am able to use this service, and I'm going to use a business service here, and here I'm calling the business service and using a create in a similar way we saw before, setting the data, using execute on the business service dispatcher, getting the count, and then we're saying if the count is equal to 0, then we don't have any open to-dos. So we create a new to-do. So again, this is how I would use this new business service within my code.